All right, welcome to another deep dive. We're tackling some really interesting stuff you sent our way, really digging into it and pulling out the good stuff, specifically for you, of course. And today, it's all about this new way of thinking about how people go after multiple goals, especially in academics, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And it's all based on this research article
Okay.
from 2017 by Wormington and Lindenbrink Garcia.
Yeah.
It's called A New Look at Multiple Goal Pursuit: The Promise of a Person-Centered Approach.
Yeah. You flagged this one for us, said it was something you wanted to, wrap your head around.
Absolutely.
So here we are.
Yeah. Happy to dive in.
And I think what we really want to get at for you is, what are the different combos of these achievement goals that students actually use?
Yeah.
And then which ones of these, patterns or profiles or whatever you want to call them are the ones that actually make a difference? Like which ones help with motivation and well-being and engagement and, actually achieving things?
Right.
Think of this as like your shortcut to understanding this whole complex area.
Yeah, it's a really crucial area. And to set the stage, let's think about how researchers have traditionally approached this whole topic of achievement goals.
Okay.
So how did they used to look at this before they came up with this person-centered idea?
So the traditional method, or what these researchers call like the variable-centered approach,
Mm-hmm.
it was very focused,
Yeah,
like zoomed right in on one goal at a time.
right.
So say, for example, how much a student really values like understanding a subject
Right.
or how much they're driven to, be better than everyone else in the class. And then they try to connect those individual goals to different outcomes.
Right. So what were some of the issues with that? What did that way of looking at things maybe kind of miss?
I mean, the biggest thing is that it's not really how it works in real life, right?
Yeesh.
Like most of us are juggling multiple things at the same time.
Right.
A student might genuinely want to like master the material, but also like get an A in the course.
Yeah.
So that old way of looking at things, the
Mm.
variable-centered approach, it didn't really account for that, wanting multiple things at the same time.
Yeah.
And then there's also been this ongoing debate about performance approach goals.
Right.
That's the whole, wanting to do better than others. Some researchers were saying it's a good thing. Some were saying it's a bad thing. Like, is it actually helpful or is it, potentially harmful?
Yeah, it's a good point. You're rarely driven by just one single motivation.
Yeah.
So this article you shared, it offers a different way of thinking about this.
Right.
So tell us more about this person-centered approach. What's the main idea there?
This is where it gets really interesting. So instead of, dissecting each goal individually, the person-centered approach looks at how those goals naturally combine within each student.
Okay.
Like, imagine it as identifying different goal profiles,
Yeah.
like unique patterns of how students prioritize different achievement goals. And the idea is this gives you a way more complete picture of what's actually influencing them academically,
Okay.
especially when they're striving for multiple things at the same time.
And so this particular study by Wormington and Lindenbrink Garcia, how did they actually look into these goal profiles? What was their methodology?
So they didn't do a whole new study with participants or anything. Instead, they went back and reviewed and synthesized a whole bunch of existing research that had already used this person-centered approach to study achievement goals.
Okay.
Like they pulled together data from 22 published studies,
Wow.
which is a lot, over 15,000 students.
That's a lot of data.
Yeah, it's huge.
But I imagine trying to compare results from 22 different studies, that must have been tricky.
Right.
Because different research teams might have used different terms for the same goal profiles,
Yeah,
right?
totally. That was a big hurdle for them.
Yeah.
I mean, the original studies used all sorts of different labels, and it made it hard to see any common patterns.
Right.
So Wormington and Lindenberg Garcia had to create this common labeling system.
Mm.
They looked at all the profiles from those 22 studies and applied a consistent set of criteria to categorize them under a single framework.
So after all that work, synthesizing and relabeling, what did they find? What kind of goal profile types did they end up with? And how common were these different types?
Okay, so they found 10 different goal profile types in total.
10. Okay.
But don't worry, we'll break it down. It's not as overwhelming as it sounds.
Okay, good.
Basically, they divided them into 3 main groups: high goal pursuit, low goal pursuit, and average goal pursuit.
Okay.
Let's start with the high goal pursuit profiles.
Sure. What made those stand out?
These were the students who generally had higher levels of striving across different goals.
Okay, makes sense.
So first, you've got the mastery high profile.
Okay.
This group made up about 13% of the total sample, and it showed up in 15 of the 22 studies. They were really all about learning for the sake of learning, really understanding the material. That's the mastery approach part.
Hmm.
But they weren't super concerned with outperforming others or avoiding effort.
Okay.
This is kind of like the classic mastery goal pursuit orientation.
Right. That's pretty clear cut.
Yeah. Next is the approach high profile.
Hmm.
This one's a little more common. About 14% of the students, and present in 12 of those studies.
Okay.
Now, these students, they were high in both mastery approach and deep performance approach goals. So they wanted to learn and understand deeply, but they also wanted to do really well compared to everyone else.
So they're motivated by both, like the internal reward of learning and the external reward of getting good grades or recognition.
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
And this is a good example of that multiple goal pursuit idea we were talking about earlier.
Right.
So then we have the high all goals profile, which was about 10% of the sample,
Mm-hmm.
found in 11 studies. These students, as you might guess, were high across the board. They wanted to learn, outperform others, and they were concerned about not looking incompetent or putting in too much effort.
So that sounds kind of intense, right? Like a lot to juggle.
Yeah, potentially. Now, on to the performance approach, high profile. This one's much smaller, just over 3% of the students and only found in 3 of the studies.
Okay.
These students, they were all about being the best, outperforming everyone else, but their focus on actually mastering the material was like average or even low.
So more focused on the end result and how they stacked up against others than the actual learning process.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Then the last one in this high goal pursuit category is the work avoidance high profile. And this was a tiny group, less than 1% of the total sample and only in 3 studies.
Okay.
These students, unsurprisingly, were all about minimizing their effort with like average or low levels of those mastery and performance approach goals.
Right. Okay, so that covers the high achievers in different ways. What about the low goal pursuit profiles? What were those students like?
Okay, so these are the students who, for whatever reason, reported lower levels of, investment in achievement goals. The most common one here was the performance low profile. About 9% of the sample found in 8 studies. These students showed low performance approach, low performance avoidance, which is like worrying about looking incompetent,
Yeah.
and low work avoidance goals. But their mastery goals, that desire to actually learn, that was about average.
Okay, so not so driven by proving themselves or avoiding looking bad or putting in effort, but still kind of interested in learning for learning's sake.
Yeah, you could say that. Then there's low all goals, a smaller group, just under 2%, found in 4 studies. These students, they were low across all achievement goals. Didn't seem particularly driven by anything.
Right. Sounds like they might be a bit disengaged, maybe?
Yeah, that's a possibility the researchers talked about.
Yeah.
Then there's performance approach low, about 7% of the students found in 5 studies.
Okay.
These students had low performance approach goals, meaning they weren't really focused on outperforming others.
Okay.
But their mastery and avoidance goals were around average.
So not really trying to be the best, but maybe still a bit concerned with understanding the stuff or not, failing or anything.
Yeah, things like it. Last one in this category is performance work avoidance low, about 3% of the sample found in 3 studies.
Okay.
These students had low work avoidance and TOR performance avoidance, but their mastery and performance approach goals were average.
Okay, so a bit of a mix there.
Right.
And you said there was also an average goal pursuit profile.
Yes. And this is the big one.
Okay.
It's called average all goals, and it turned out to be the most common profile. Like a whopping 37% of the total sample found in 18 of the 22 studies.
Wow.
And, well, these students were average across all the different goals.
Really? That's interesting.
Right. You'd think more students would be in those, like, high or low striving groups, but nope. Most were just average.
Yeah, you'd think so. Makes
Yeah.
you wonder what that means, right? Like, what's going on with those average
Right. It's a good question. So now we have these 10 different goal profiles. The big question is, how do they actually relate to academic outcomes?
Right, that's what we want to know.
Like, does one profile lead to better grades than another?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Wormington and Lindenbrink Garcia, they use these fancy statistical techniques called meta-analytic techniques,
Okay.
which basically means they combined and analyzed the data from all 22 studies to see if there were any overall trends.
Okay.
And they looked at 4 main outcomes: motivation, social and emotional well-being, engagement and learning, and then, of course, actual academic achievement.
Okay, sounds thorough.
Yeah. So first, motivation. Which profiles showed the highest levels of motivation and which ones had, like, the lowest?
Right.
Well, Mastery High had the highest motivation across the board.
Okay, not surprising.
On the other end, we had average all goals, low all goals, and performance approach low. They all have pretty low motivation. But what's interesting is that approach high, remember those who were high in both mastery and D performance approach, they weren't that much lower in motivation compared to mastery high.
Oh, okay.
And even the performance work avoidance low profile wasn't significantly lower.
Huh, that's interesting. So a strong focus on learning seems to be a key for motivation, but having a little bit of that desire to do well compared to others doesn't necessarily hurt.
Exactly. And being lukewarm about everything seems to be a recipe for low motivation.
Makes sense. What about well-being then? How did the profiles affect how students felt about themselves and their social interactions?
Well, for well-being, Mastery High again reported the highest levels. But here's a surprise. So did low all goals.
Really?
Yeah, the work avoidance high and performance approach low profiles had the lowest levels of well-being.
Interesting. So maybe those with low investment across the board are just less stressed?
Yeah, could be.
Interesting. Okay, what about engagement? How involved were students in their learning?
So again, Mastery High showed the highest engagement.
Okay.
But another interesting finding was that performance work avoidance low also showed high engagement, which is kind of surprising, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
The lowest engagement levels were in average all goals, low all goals, and performance approach low. So a strong focus on learning seems to keep students engaged, but even those who are just trying to avoid negative outcomes can sometimes get really into it.
So it seems like Mastery High is consistently a positive profile for motivation and engagement. What about actual achievement, though? Which profiles led to the best grades?
All right, so this is where things get even more interesting. The profiles linked to the best achievement were actually performance approach low and performance work avoidance low.
Oh, wow, okay.
Mastery High and approach high weren't that far behind. But average all goals and low all goals had the lowest achievement. So while focusing on learning doesn't hurt achievement, it's not the only way to succeed. And that average approach seems to be a bad sign.
Yeah, really interesting. So the patterns that lead to the highest motivation and engagement aren't necessarily the best predictors of achievement,
Right.
although they're definitely up there.
Yeah.
And it seems like that average all goals profile, which is super common, might actually be holding students back.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings us back to that debate we mentioned earlier. Is it better to focus mainly on mastery goals, that intrinsic desire to learn, or is there a benefit to also pursuing performance approach goals, wanting to be better than others?
Right. So what did these findings tell us about that debate?
Well, both Mastery High and Approach High were pretty common and linked to good outcomes across the board, which suggests that both approaches can work.
Okay.
However, the study didn't really prove that pursuing both types of goals together was better than just focusing on mastery. And the performance approach high profile, where the main focus was on outperforming others, wasn't linked to the best outcomes.
Right.
So wanting to learn seems like a good foundation, and adding a bit of that competitive drive might not hurt,
Yeah.
but it doesn't guarantee better results than just focusing on mastery.
What about avoidance goals, though? How did those factor in?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, the study actually found that wanting to do well, the performance approach goals, and worrying about looking incompetent, the performance avoidance goals, they can actually exist independently of each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't automatically worry about failing just because you want to succeed.
Hmm.
But when students had both approach and avoidance goals, that high all goals profile, they did show some weaknesses, especially in motivation, compared to mastery high.
Right.
But the negative effects of avoidance goals weren't always as strong as you might think.
And how did that compare to the performance work avoidance low profile, where students had low levels of those avoidance goals? Well, that profile actually had better outcomes than the average all goals profile, which suggests that having those higher levels of avoidance goals, especially when your approach goals are just average, might actually be holding you back.
Interesting.
So it's not just about whether you have performance goals, but also about how they fit into the overall mix of your goal orientations, including those avoidance tendencies.
Right, okay.
Oh.
Makes sense. You also mentioned that there were some less obvious findings that were worth mentioning.
Oh, yeah.
What were some of those?
Well, first, a lot of students actually endorsed those high performance goals in combination with other goals, around 27%.
Okay.
So wanting to do well seems to be a pretty big motivator for a lot of students, which kind of goes against the idea that it's rare or always a bad thing.
Right.
But the key point is that pursuing performance goals on their own, without any focus on mastery or anything else, was actually pretty uncommon.
Okay.
Another big thing was that the average all goals profile, remember that was the most common one? Well, it was consistently linked to worse outcomes across the board.
Right.
Motivation, well-being, engagement, achievement.
Right.
So maybe being average isn't actually the best approach.
Yeah, it makes you think.
And finally, those low goal pursuit profiles, they represent a lot of students, but they haven't really been studied that much.
Okay.
And some of them, like the performance work avoidance low group, actually showed surprisingly good achievement.
Interesting.
So it's not as simple as mastery good, performance bad. It's about how all those different types of goals work together.
Yeah. The whole picture.
And that leads us to this idea of the overall intensity of goal pursuit, how much a student is striving, and then the balance between those positive mastery goals and the potentially negative avoidance goals, like trying to avoid looking bad or putting in effort.
Right.
The researchers suggest that the effectiveness of a goal profile might depend on both how hard a student is trying, indeed, the balance between their desire to learn and their desire to avoid negative stuff.
So those mastery high and approach high profiles, they're examples of high effort with a good balance towards learning,
Right.
which seem to be positive.
Yeah.
And then you've got the average all goals and low all goals profiles, which had low effort and a more neutral or even negative balance. And those weren't as good.
Exactly.
Okay.
So to wrap things up for you, what are the big takeaways from this deep dive into the Wormington and Lindenbrink-Garcia study?
Well, it's pretty clear that having a strong focus on mastery goals, that real desire to learn and understand the material, is a good thing. It helps with pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And adding in a healthy dose of performance approach goals, wanting to do well compared to others, doesn't necessarily hurt. In fact, it's pretty common. But the most interesting takeaway is that being average across all types of goals might actually be a problem.
Right.
It seems to be linked to less motivation, lower well-being, less engagement, and lower achievement. It's not as good as you might think.
Yeah.
And this person-centered approach, looking at these whole patterns of goals, it gives us a much better understanding of how these things work together.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual goals, but about how they combine and influence each other.
So a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
Think about your own approach to goals in all areas of your life, not just academics. Do you see any patterns that are similar to these profiles? What about the intensity and balance of your own goal portfolio? What does it say about you?
That's a good question.
Could aiming for the middle ground or focusing too much on one type of goal be affecting your motivation and your success?
Yeah. This deep dive really gives you a new way to think about motivation. It's not just those simple things you always hear. It's much more complex than that.
Yeah. And it encourages you to think about the whole range of ways we approach our goals.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope it's given you some new insights into your own motivation and the motivation of the people around you.
For sure.
Until next time.
See ya.